Hey, Aaron, welcome back to the show. As a way of getting started, give us a little update on yourself.
Yeah, so it's been a few years since we last did one of these, but now I'm at Walters Kluwer as a director, and I oversee a sales force here in the United States and in Canada. And what we do is we provide products to CPA firms and corporations around tax software and tax research. So we make sure that they're squared away with state and federal regulations and get the access to the information that they need to run their businesses. And we're talking about CPA firms, generally speaking, and corporations. And so I've been privileged to lead a great group of men and women in both the U.S. and Canada. So recently moved into that role. And I'm also on the side, I also have the privilege and honor of teaching at Clemson in the MBA program in the negotiation aspect of it. And also a venture capital course at a small private institution, Bob Jones University here in South Carolina. So it keeps me busy, but sales and sales leadership is something I'm very passionate about.
Yeah. Have you been doing any recruiting?
I have every day, it seems. So yes, recruiting is something that I probably branded myself pretty much everywhere I go as something that I'm very passionate about and excited about. It's human capital because this business is about people. And I thought it'd be really interesting to have a discussion with you and let you weigh in as well for the audience on some recruiting best practices for sales leaders, some mistakes that you can make, and also though some of the errors that I see that salespeople make all the time when I'm recruiting on LinkedIn or when I look at resumes. It just seems like the errors are getting worse. And as far as how some people are presenting themselves. So I thought, you know what? I just wanted to share what I've discovered. There's no dogmaticism here. Like the things that I share are just maybe my way of doing things. There's other ways to do it. But I thought it'd be a great discussion.
Yeah, so let's start there. What's important to you, I guess, when you're now that you've got some experience or a lot of experience at it, I'm sure there's some things that work and some things that don't work. What works?
Well, I wrote a few things down that I'll share. First is having a bench. So for your players, especially your leaders, if you lead leaders. What I mean by that is, having a few options of people that you're networking with,
Yeah.
generally through LinkedIn or at networking events. So, leaders are going to resign, people are going to resign, you're going to have turnover at some point. So having a bench, having a candidate profile, 2 or 3 individuals that you've networked with for each position is really, really comfortable because when somebody does leave, you have somebody you can move into that role and you don't have that lag time, especially when you're staring at a quota. So I think that's important. I think another thing is at least spending an hour a week on recruiting. We get so wrapped up in the numbers. So an hour a week in recruiting, just getting on LinkedIn and doing some searches and doing some in-mails and networking, I think is extremely critical. Branding yourself on LinkedIn is something else that I think is very important. I think your profile speaks a lot. What do you have in your featured section? How are you branding yourself? What does your experience look like? What are your skill sets? Do you have recommendations? So I think your profile also is very, very important to spend time on. And so I think that's also something essential. And a couple other things I wrote, and we can dive into any of these if you want to, is personalizing your in-mail when you're reaching out and recruiting candidates as a sales leader. People get hit up all the time by recruiters. I do as well. So personalize your email. Don't make it a template. Be very personal. If you have something in common with that candidate, like you worked at the same company or you have similar interests, certainly that helps as well. But I think another big thing is I always state that I'm a hiring manager and I'm not a recruiter, and I'm being very selective in my process. I ran across your profile, and what I see really stands out to me, and I'd love to have a conversation to see if there's interest. So I think that's really important.
I like the always be recruiting
Hmm.
because it works both ways. Even if you're a happy, successful salesperson, you should always be networking,
Correct.
not just for
Yes,
clients, but for possible opportunities eventually.
I agree with that. Why do you
Yeah.
think that? Why do you think it is that people lose sight of that?
I think it's just salespeople are kind of conditioned to only do what they have to do to get the things when they need them.
Yeah, excellent point.
And
Yeah,
I think that's a huge mistake
yeah.
because when you need a job, it takes what, at least 3 months to find a good job,
Hmm. Hmm.
starting
Especially in
from
this climate.
scratch. Yeah.
Right.
And even longer in this type of climate when you got the ocean of people, the tide comes in with all these people all at once.
It does. Yeah, I
And
mean, I think that's an excellent point. And, it kind of segues into, when you're marketing yourself as a salesperson, right? I see good and bad, right? And so how are you, networking is something that's very important. I think LinkedIn is just such a tremendous tool. Like that's obviously how you and I connected, but I think it's underutilized by a lot of salespeople in creating that network, growing your following, reaching out to people. And so that when things do change and you're in the climate, you're looking for something else. Sometimes it is who you know and being able to
most of
make
the
those
time.
introductions, right?
And
So
it
how do you think, go ahead.
and it should be who you know,
Right.
but it doesn't have to be somebody that you worked with or you know super well in your fraternity or your school. It can be somebody that you've just like, comment, and shared their stuff and been following each other for 3 months
Hmm.
and have similar views of the world.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And well, I think too that what we see a lot too from salespeople is when they're looking for jobs, they just apply on LinkedIn, just throw their resume in their application. And as you and I both know, that's not going far enough, right? So networking with the recruiters at a company, and reaching out direct to the recruiters is something where I think we see a lot of salespeople make a lot of mistakes. They don't get a call back. They send out 50 applications. Again, going back to the networking, right? Network with recruiters at various organizations that you want to be a part of. Find
Yeah.
those recruiters on LinkedIn, introduce yourself, ask what job requisitions are open. And I think that that's essential for your career success, no doubt.
Well, that's it. Because when you have a job, you have the confidence.
Hmm.
I don't, when I'm in between jobs, you're pretty insecure, at least until you get an offer.
You get desperate, right?
A little,
Yeah,
right? And your judgment kind of gets fogged by your
yeah.
desperation.
It's interesting that you say that because I think that's just a principle in sales in general, right?
It
When you're
is.
looking at a salesperson, you can always tell, if they have what we call negotiation, a BATNA, best available alternative to a negotiated agreement. Okay, the more alternatives somebody has, okay, the less desperate they're going to be. So to the whole point, the premise here of networking, right? The more alternatives you have of organizations that are interested in you, okay, it's a lot easier to sit back and take a no. It makes a no a whole lot more palatable when you've got one or two or three other options that you're really considering. And it's same thing with pipeline build, right? You can always
Yes.
tell the reps that don't have a lot of pipeline is they're coming at you and they're hard charging. And the cure, right, to any desperate sales rep is a nice qualified pipeline. And
Yes.
I look at recruiting as the same thing.
And I think people need to understand the stuff that comes in through the front door, the company's website, because I've been on the receiving end of that sometimes.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I don't know how much time you give to it.
Not much.
Not much, because it's anything from landscapers to released convicts to qualified people. And a lot of people think that that's the right door.
Hmm.
The back door is the people we already know, already worked with, would love to have, but there's only a few of them.
Right.
The side door is what we're talking about. The people that we've been talking to, have learned a little bit about over a couple of months, and they're not looking, and we don't have an opening, but we want the conversation to continue.
Oh, it's spot on. I mean, so I think about my career, right? I just networking with recruiters. Sometimes even when I came to work at Walters Kluwer, like the recruiter that I built a relationship with didn't have anything at the time. 3 or 4 months later, I get a phone call, right? Hey, we've got something for you. Think this might be right, but you have that relationship that you've built,
Yes.
and that's where I think a lot of salespeople are going wrong, especially in today's climate. And it's interesting, Brent, because it brings up a few mistakes that I'm also seeing. So salespeople are not networking. Sales leaders aren't networking, right, to find good candidates and find those A reps. Okay, but when it comes to salespeople, I've been really dismayed recently at the resumes that I get. Like they're just appalling. And let me tell you a few observations that I've had to share, and I'd love to hear you weigh in on these. Okay, first of all, when I'm looking at a resume, I like to see awards and accomplishments and objective material. So generally what I see with these sales resumes is you have a job title, the location that you're in, right? And then you have your bullet points below. What most of these people are doing is in the bullet points, they're just using those as job descriptions. They're just telling me what their job is. I manage these people, or I did this, or I had this territory. They're not giving me any accomplishments. It's a job description. They're wasting their bullet points.
Yes.
So the suggestion would be in your resume, is right under your title, you should have a couple of asterisks, and in small italics, just put your job description. Okay, what that is, what it is that you do, the territory you managed, or you sold a major accounts, or you're an enterprise rep, whatever that is. Use your bullet points to give me your accomplishments, right? So you achieved this, created this, initiated this, using those action words. You were 120% to this. You were number 1 out of 600 reps. Okay, that's what I want to see. I want to see that objective criterion as a sales leader. This is a proven winner. And saying you're the top rep in a company is still vague. I was a top out of 50. I was a top out of 10. I was number 2 out of 100. I was an Eagle Award winner. I was President's Club. I went to conference 4 years in a row. Like, those things are phenomenal to see in those bulleted points. It's a track record of success, but be very specific there. So I don't know. What do you think about that? I mean, do you
Yeah,
think that there's something to that?
100%. Early in my career, I did the former. I was responsible. I covered this company, that company, and I didn't put the things down. And when I go for an interview, I would say, like, well, they're asking me what my quota was, what achievement was, my ranking year after year. And I go, why don't I just put that on the resume?
Hmm.
Because let's face it, how much time do you spend with a resume?
Right. It's got
You're
to be.
not
It's got to
taking your
grab you right away.
monocles out and like looking for DNA on it. You're like looking for something that stands out.
Hmm.
And what stands out? Percentage of quota, ranking, accounts. Um, does it fit the same demographic? What
Hmm.
questions are you going to ask this person during an interview? Why not put the answers right on the resume?
Couldn't have said it better.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it saves me from asking those questions. Oftentimes, I like to dive into it a little bit more when I see those results. Tell me about, your circle of excellence. What are the qualifiers for that?
Yeah.
Right? Or your president's club, and what are some of the things that you did that year to be successful and to achieve that? Hey, I noticed that the following year you didn't make it. What did you learn from that experience? You had kind of a drop off, or what happened there, and oh, your quotas went up, and or it was unrealistic, or whatever. So it tells a story. Being vulnerable, I think, is a thing that we kind of hesitate to do as salespeople, but it really helps the interviewer and the sales leader. So I always say brag. Sometimes we ask for those quote brag books. I like to see your accomplishments, because that history is often an indicator of future success.
Yeah.
Now the question for you is, go ahead.
And I think you mentioned it right, because being vulnerable builds trust.
That's right.
Because the balance between the bragging about your accomplishments and being vulnerable where you failed or you didn't make
Mm.
it.
It's funny you said that. I had an interview yesterday, and I asked a couple of candidates these questions. So I often do what you've so overtly heard of as a SWOT analysis. So every once in a while, I like to use that in an interview. What are your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? And it's funny, everybody likes to talk about their strengths. But when we get to weaknesses, it's a passive aggressive philosophy. I'm too organized. I'm
I work too
impatient.
hard.
I've had that one. Yep. I work too hard. Okay. And it's positive, negative, passive, aggressive, like, be vulnerable, open up. So what I usually find that I can do, this is the best practice for a leader, is I kick it off and be vulnerable with them and say, what, let me kick this off and tell you what I'm looking for. I struggle as a leader sometimes where I set expectations way too high for people that work for me. They can't ever achieve my expectations. I think expectations are great, or I'm too controlling sometimes as a leader, and I don't delegate like I should, right? Because I don't trust people like I should, and I need to do a better job of that. That's something where I'm growing as a leader, so you, Mr. Sales Rep or Miss Sales Rep, walk me through maybe what do those look like for you, and I need you just to open up and tell me where I can coach you. Where do we make you better? There's got to be something. And peeling back that onion, and it's really neat to see the reps that embrace that and say, hey, I really struggle with this, or I really, need to do better. I'm not good with objection handling, and it's something where I'm growing and I struggle with that. Okay. And they put themselves out there, but those are the things that I really like to hear, is that vulnerability. So I think you're right.
And can you give us an example of somebody who's done it really well with you, either an
Hmm.
interview or gotten that interview where they may
Yeah.
not have been a superstar, but you gave them the chance?
Um, it's interesting that, well, last year, this is maybe a similar story. So another thing I was going to mention is I also look for candidates that have what I call a unique qualifier, and generally on LinkedIn, right? And you can put it on your resume. Something that makes you different. So let me give you a specific example. I had a gentleman a year and a half ago that I recruited. to work for me when I managed the Northeastern Territory for Wolters Kluwer. I was just a regional director at the time. And he worked for companies, very happy. But on his resume, he was a former poker player. Okay. And I thought that was interesting. It really grabbed me. Okay. And it was what I call a unique qualifier. He did it for a career, as a career.
Wow.
And then he went into the software business and he was successful there. Well, I grabbed it on his LinkedIn. I reached out to him on InMail. It took me 3 times to get him to have a conversation with me because he was really happy there. But by the way, that is the best practice for leaders. Recruit people that are happy where they are. Right. That's just a number one thing for me. I like it when you object and say, I'm happy, leave me alone. Okay. Because then I like to peel back the onion and say, well, there's got to be something. Right. But anyway, back to this individual. So after the 4th opportunity, he agreed to meet with me. And after we met and let him talk to some of my senior salespeople, you know, as a poker player, I challenged him, from a standpoint of, hey, you're a risk taker, right? You're a poker player. This is a risk worth taking. Bet on me. Bet on me. Trust me as a leader that what I'm telling you is exactly what's going to happen when you're here. Okay. So I played on that and he hesitated for a minute. He says, okay, I'm in. A year later, he made a ton of money and was rookie of the year or tied for rookie of the year. And had a sensational year and totally glad he made the move and thanked me a year later by saying, boy, I'm really glad that I took a risk. I said, that's who you are at your core, right? You're a risk taker, you're a gambler. And I love that. And, so another individual that I hired that same year was a Division I hockey goalie. And it was a female athlete that was a hockey goalie at UConn. Okay. And when I saw that, it grabbed me. I'm like, okay, she's probably tough. She's competitive. And again, very similar success, came in right away, hit the ground running and did very, very well for us. So unique qualifiers are a great way to advertise yourself on LinkedIn and on your resume. Things that you did, if you were a gymnast, okay, if you're a D1 athlete, those things are really, really helpful in uncovering a potential fit.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people try to be the Boy Scout or they don't put any personality into it.
Mm,
You can put too much, but a little bit's good.
yeah, I agree.
Right. Because the poker player thing, that's a judgment call. Do I put that on a LinkedIn profile or not?
It really is.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, you think about that, right? And what you put on that profile and how you brand yourself. And this individual is very successful, or was.
yeah.
Okay. But I'm really glad he did. And he was a great find for us. And, they're A players. I mean, when you find, the other thing that I think is important, Brian, that sales leaders aren't doing is take your best reps and create a template of success. So what I found when I got to Wolters Kluwer is I looked at across the whole business and I said, the top 10 reps, what's the common trait between them? Oh, they all come from the same 2 companies. Right. Like I noticed our top players, because of the training that these other companies provided them, they're well trained. Okay. So I found that as a common thread. So I'm like, all right, I know which companies I need to go after to find candidates. Okay. So that was a common thread. 2, it's a personality style that they all have. They're very similar. They're drivers or they're expressives. Okay. So their social style and analyzing that. So you do a little bit of interviewing, talking around, create that template of what that rep looks like, and then replicate it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that we miss. Sometimes we're just, out there, oh, I think this person will do a great job, but stick to your guns, identify your template, and then go after and find that person that fits.
Now, you're kind of unusual because a lot of leaders just want to fill the seats
Hmm.
instead of build a team or build the best of the best.
Yeah.
How did you come to that conclusion?
Well, Brian, for me, I'm a coach. I'm not a manager. So, I develop my people. I would say, you hear the cliche leader versus manager. We talk about it all around. Yes, I want to lead my people. I want to pull, not push. Okay. But I believe in development and coaching. And so, to me, I don't want to just hire somebody to sit in a seat. We've got quotas to hit. When you're going to win championships, so let's equate sports analogies to this for a second. To win a sales championship, you have to develop your people. Okay. And you have to get in the trenches and really help and assist them. You don't want people filling seats. Okay. So you need good hires. You need talent. You can't afford to make bad hires. A specific example, when I started at Wolters Kluwer a year and a half ago, I had 2 open positions. I knew that if I missed on either hire, I'm not going to win because the quotas are too high. It's too aggressive. I had to go 2 for 2. The stakes were high. So I hired these 2 individuals that I told you about. And last year we won a championship, right? What I mean by that is we were the top team. in that division, right? We exceeded our quota by $3 million. 2 million of it came from those individuals. Had I made bad hires, we're not top team. We struggle to hit quota for the year. Okay, all because of that, because I didn't take the time to create a template, go out and recruit, find the best individuals, and settle. Okay, in fact, before I hired that gentleman I was talking to you about, I interviewed a couple other people, and I found myself talking myself into a couple people. I don't know if you've ever done that. You're like, yeah, I really like this guy, but I can't place it, or this lady, she's really great. And my boss at the time just said to me, listen, if you're 99% sure, you're 100% unsure. I'm like, man, that's exactly right. I got to pass. And
Yeah.
I'm glad I did, because then I found the individual that played poker, and he was great. He was a rock star. So you got to have those A players. Take your time, do it right. Don't make mistakes. Bad hires are expensive to the company, and they really make it hard to hit your quotas. It's not
And,
getting any easier in 2023.
and what in your role separates an A player from a B player?
Mm. I think the number one thing is attitude.
Yeah.
So there's an I in attitude and an I in winning. And that means it's me. I got to have a good attitude. There's a commonality between attitude and winning. That's what they share in common, and it's you. There's an I in the middle. And so attitude is everything. So I'm looking for that. I think that that's an important quality to have. But I'm also looking for, somebody that has a track record of success. Okay. I'm also looking for, somebody that has what I would call a driver, expressive personality in a social style. Okay. So those are things that are really important to me. And I think that, but the attitude is the biggest thing. So is it a positive attitude? Can I coach? Are they humble? Can I develop them and make them better? It's hard to work with people that feel like they all got figured out. And you know what? It's funny, Brian. I've been following you for a long time, and it's interesting to see the comments. Like, we all think we have it figured out in sales because we all have egos.
Well, I haven't noticed that.
you know, so there'll be comments on this video as well that I don't know what I'm doing, or you don't know what you're talking about. But anyway, at the end of the day, that's who we are, and I get that we're all different. But those are things that I really found works well for me.
Yeah. Now you can't see that on the LinkedIn profile. That's something you have to talk to somebody with to
Yeah.
discover.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the LinkedIn profile, like when I look at my own from a branding standpoint, the message that I want to convey, I mean, I noticed that you looked at my profile today, like what's the message I want to send to the market?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that my backdrop conveys a message, the professional picture that I'm using, what's in my featured section, the kinds of things that I enjoy talking about from a sales standpoint or in the featured section, people are going to click and listen to those, and they're going to get a good understanding of how I view sales leadership and sales. Okay, and they're either really going to gravitate toward it, or they're not going to like it at all, and that's okay. In my experience, right, I'm very articulate. I almost take what's on my resume and put it on that LinkedIn profile. It's kind of an online resume, but it's very much objective as far as what I've accomplished in the roles, what my role is, and those past experiences. And then I think too, your recommendations are big. What's it like to work for this guy? So those recommendations at the bottom that people have given me, I'm very thankful for,
Yeah.
because when you're recruiting a candidate, they're going to look at that. Do I really want to talk to this individual? So that profile is really big. You need to invest time to build out every facet of it. But, look at it and say, what kind of message do I want to send?
And because if you look at profiles, if you, especially when you're recruiting from, a big company or a well-known company, how do you tell that they earned those accomplishments
Mm,
versus they were lucky enough to be in that territory at that time?
yeah. That's a really good question. I mean, those are obviously things that you have to dive into an interview. So, to give you a specific example, I ran across this a few years ago. I interviewed a guy. I was in Atlanta. I was interviewing for an Atlanta position. And this individual worked for a company where he was a major market rep. And I used to work for that company, 17, 18 years ago. And so I knew the internals and how that company worked. Well, anyway, he advertised on paper that he was $1 million producer the year before. And I said, hey, you know what? If you're $1 million producer, if that's what you did last year, like we don't even need we don't need to talk any further in this interview. Like if you're that good, like I will extend you an offer. I just need to quantify that. Could you just, could you give me, someone I could talk to, or do you have a sales report that you could show me that you kept? Anything that could just validate that, because that's a pretty big accomplishment. I know very few people that have accomplished that. And after the interview, never heard from him again, right? Never followed up, never got back to me. So, to me, you've got to inspect the resumes and the LinkedIn
Yeah.
profiles, people can say whatever they want. You know, they do
Right.
mislead, and you be careful as a sales individual on your resume. Be able to quantify what you put on paper to a certain extent. You know, I get that you can't have people call your current company if you're interviewing elsewhere, but if you do have sales reports or things that show and can validate those numbers, sometimes it's healthy to inspect or to make some reference checks. Some of the worst hires I ever made, Brian, I failed to do my due diligence. I didn't do reference checks. They interviewed well. They were pristine interviews. They looked great on paper. Okay. And then had I called their references, I would have discovered that they were not team players. They were really hard to work with. Okay. They were lazy, you know, various issues, and I got burned. So, you know, you learn, right? But those are some of the things that I've noticed.
Has anybody brought a W-2 to an interview?
Well, I think there's laws against asking for that. So I
There
don't
are,
know that I've
but
asked for
but
that, especially depending on the state. So I generally don't ask anymore for that. But I don't think there's anything wrong with you bringing one to validate it, like proactively. I've actually, it's been a while, but I've done that. I think it was 2012 last time I did that, to validate that. Really, that was during the negotiation for the salary,
yeah.
right? Where it's like, hey, all right, validate that you made X, right? And that you're asking me for X, like you know. And so sometimes that can come in handy when you get into that spot if you're being challenged in that area. That's a good point.
And what would you recommend to somebody who happens to be outside right now, doesn't have a job, wants but doesn't want to take a, a reverse position, less of a position than they had? They
Mhm.
actually want to get a better position. What would the steps be that you'd recommend they do?
So they're not employed right now.
Not employed right now.
Okay. And they're looking to go above and beyond where they were before.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, to me, if that's the case, if they're not employed right now, they're obviously deleveraged.
Right.
So, you know, certainly in a sense, when you know, the best way to look for a job is when you have a job. Okay. So that's certainly very important because you have some leverage when it comes to your negotiating. But, you know, Grant Cardone says it the best: chase the opportunity, not the money. Right. So it goes back to, you know, how you brand and present yourself and adding value. So the way you get that big job is demonstrating the type of value you can add to that organization of business and why you believe you can do that role. You're not going to do that putting an application on LinkedIn for that VP role. It's going to be using your sales ability to get into the recruiter that's handling the requisition for that VP role, getting them on the phone and saying, I noticed you had a VP role on LinkedIn. I wanted to ask you some questions about it. I think I might be a potentially a great fit for that role. Can you walk me through a little bit about what that role is about? I saw that the words, or hey, I had a question on this. Is this a remote job? Is there a lot of travel here? What is a process here for me getting an interview for this or getting considered for this? Okay, and putting your name on that map. So it's using your sales skills to get to that recruiter and that requisition, but you're going to have to demonstrate that value because a lot of those recruiters will screen you. You know, so demonstrating the value for some people, they go out and get MBAs and things of that nature as well, right? For those types of positions, increase your education, make yourself more marketable.
Yep.
Okay, so those are all things that I think adding value. How do you add value? Making yourself marketable. What can you do to take that next step?
But what I noticed is what you said, how you can add value to the company, not how great you are.
Yeah, interesting you say that. Somebody just came to my mind. I was interviewing a candidate yesterday, and he kept talking, and I usually take my iPhone and I just start the clock for
Yeah.
salespeople, right?
Just so you know, you're not crazy.
Yeah, and we all struggle with it. So it's not that I haven't done it before myself. I've gotten a whole lot better over the last 10 years. So there's a time it was a whole lot worse, but we all struggle with wanting to talk. But anyway, it was 10 or 11 minutes. And because I asked this individual to tell me about your career and your background, and I don't cut them off and cut in and just went. Conversely, I had a candidate where I asked the same question and they concisely answered the question in about 2 to 3 minutes, and they turned around and asked me a question. They were in control of the interview. In fact, I
Yeah.
found that individual trying to control me and not allowing me to control the interview because they kept firing questions back at me and then listening. Okay. So they would answer my question. They would say, but hold on, you asked me what my strengths are. What do you typically see? What are the most successful reps in that role? What do you see the strengths are? And do my strengths kind of correlate with what you're seeing? Then they stop and listen. Like, hey, that's a great question. Well, there's some commonalities between some of these you're saying. Or So, those what I find are the type of reps that I really want on my team.
That's it. And sometimes they're just out of shape as far as interviewing and
That's a good
maybe
point.
nervous and stuff, but they have to realize this is the chance.
Right.
And
Yeah.
if,
And yeah, you got one shot at it. And first impression does matter. We all realize as sales leaders, you're nervous. Okay. When I interview, I still get nervous. It's a good thing.
yeah,
Yeah, but you settle in. And the thing is important just to be genuine, be authentic. So the guy yesterday I was telling you about oversold me. And I did provide that feedback to that individual in the interview. I said, I just need to give you some feedback. I mean, you're a really qualified candidate. I really like you. Here's the problem. Okay, is that you oversold me. And if you do that to my clients, they're not going to want to talk to you, the prospects. If you approach your sales process, you're trying to sell yourself, you're selling my product. Okay, I'm a little concerned about your ability to translate that into the field. So, those are things that we just have to be cautious of.
and what's your go-to question during the interview that kind of gives you the warm and fuzzy or the cold and distant feeling about somebody?
Yeah, I mean, it's different for everybody. For me, it's so different for every interview because I kind of adapt to the type of individual that I'm talking to, and I'm pretty organic. I like to make the interview very conversational. Okay, so but at the end of the day, I try to really dig into going back to value. Why do you believe, based on what you know of the role at this time, okay, that you're going to add the most value to me? What do you believe that you're really bringing to the table based on the knowledge of the role that's been presented to you? Now, and if you have more questions about the role before you answer, that's fine. Okay, but once you have that picture, what is it, right, that I should expect from you? And what type of value are you bringing to me? That's what I'm buying. I'm buying value. And I
Yeah,
always often look too at sales reps like a stock, right? Are you buying or selling? Okay. And I found with candidates is, sometimes I see a stock on sale, which means I see a really good sales candidate, okay, that's been passed up with for a few other opportunities. I'm like, I like this person. I think this person can be coached up. Because remember, if we're coaches as sales leaders and we're developers, nothing wrong with taking that candidate and coaching and developing them and really making them better. It doesn't always have to be the 5-star athlete. There's some really good finds out there in that 3 and 4 star level, and you see it in them, that raw sales ability that
yep,
they can bring that value to you. And you say, I can make this person better. I'm going all in. So,
great.
those are just some of the things that I look for, generally speaking.
Excellent. Appreciate your time today, Aaron. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
Yep, my LinkedIn profile, just search for Aaron David Cullup on LinkedIn, and you'll find me pretty easy that way. And so thank you very much. I really appreciate the time, Brian. It's good talking to you again.